Mr. Speaker, you know what I hear back home about the carbon tax? You work all week to buy food that costs too much, and it's the same for gas. New Brunswick wants the carbon tax gone, just like they want the Prime Minister gone, because he's not worth the cost. On this side of the House, we understand the pressure the Liberal carbon tax has put on everyone, and we will continue to fight to axe the tax. Do the Atlantic MPs support the Prime Minister with his plan to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents after the next election?
Here.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, after a year where Canadians have experienced record hurricanes, destruction from natural disasters, wildfires, the Conservatives still can't say the words climate change. They can't acknowledge that climate change is impacting our economy, our livelihoods, and in many cases, our very lives, Madam Speaker. We need to step up and fight climate change, and it's time that we stop debating whether we fight climate change, but how we fight climate change. So I would urge the members opposite, particularly those from Atlantic Canada, whose livelihoods are impacted by climate change every single season.
The honourable from Miramichi Grand Lake.
Madam Speaker, more divide and conquering from the other side of the floor. Last week, the Minister from Long Range Mountains said the punishing carbon tax exemption wasn't granted to Canadians across the country because they didn't vote Liberal. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister said if re-elected, the NDP-Liberal government will quadruple the carbon tax on home heating, gas and groceries to 61 cents a litre. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister direct the Finance Minister in her call today with provincial ministers to axe the carbon tax for good and for everyone?
Honourable member for the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Sorry.
Madam Speaker, our ambition is to move Canadians who currently use home heating oil, which is the most carbon intensive, the least healthy, and the most expensive way to heat a home, onto an efficient heat pump. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of constituents in New Brunswick who still use home heating oil, but the Premier of New Brunswick still hasn't signed on to our heat pump program. So I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks talking to Conservative provincial members to try to convince the Premier of Ontario to sign on so that my neighbours in Milton who use home heating oil can have access to a high-efficiency heat pump and get off of that expensive, dirty way to heat their home.
Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Yesterday, Nova Scotia NDP Liberals said removing the carbon tax from home heating will only save pennies. Every tank of home heating oil has at least $200 of carbon tax, apparently just pennies to Liberals. The Liberal carbon tax plan now is to increase home heating oil and carbon taxes to $2,400 a year after the election. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Liberal who supports the quadrupling of the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre after the next election please stand up?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the Conservatives are not giving all the information. Where there is a rebate providing to Canadians, there's also what we've done. Last week, we've doubled the rural top-off to 20%, which is important. If the member would care about jobs, he would have voted for C-49. If the member cared about jobs, they would tell his party to stop filibustering the Natural Resources Committee to pass legislation on C-49. They won't even have the legislation come to committee for debate, to bring the premiers, to bring witnesses to talk about it. It's shameful, it's reckless, and they're not there for Canadians.
Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, last Thursday the Prime Minister announced a temporary pause on the carbon tax on home heating for some Canadians, but not all. It's cold in Calgary in the winter, and after 8 years, Calgarians are struggling to afford to heat their homes and know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. On Monday, will the MP for Calgary Skyview be permitted to vote for our common-sense Conservative plan to take the tax off so Canadians can keep the heat on, or will his vote get lost in the mail?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the question from the member from Calgary Rocky Ridge, but I would like to reinforce the fact that this is a Canada-wide program, and it is about getting Canadians off of home heating oil, not in one region, but in all regions, Madam Speaker, because heating your home with home heating oil is expensive, it is dirty, it is unhealthy, and it is the most emissions-intensive way to heat your home, Madam Speaker. A home heating pump will provide relief economically and on the environmental side as we lower our emissions, phasing out coal and dirty fuels like home heating oil right across Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The owner of Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, this government and this parliamentary secretary are simply dividing Canadians. This government continues to divide Canadians, and it gets even colder in Edmonton. And it's obvious that the Minister for Edmonton Centre has absolutely no pull with this government because for years he has failed to deliver and to represent Alberta in cabinet. So Monday is his big chance. Will the Minister for Edmonton Centre finally stand up for Alberta and vote for our common sense motion to take the tax off so his constituents in Edmonton can keep the heat on?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Speaker, let me go back to the earlier questions about Northern Ontario. I'm happy to say that for the first time, the former leader of the Conservative Party from Regina Capel came to Northern Ontario. He's there now. People in Northern Ontario have voted strongly for strong Liberals MPs in Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay. I'm really happy to see that now for the first time the Conservative Party is paying attention to Northern Ontario. They voted against the critical mineral program, which is $3 billion. They voted against FedNor. They voted against EV. They're voting against projects that are important to Northern Ontario. I welcome the debate in the House.
Montmagny, l'honorable député de Montmagny, Lisle, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Madam Speaker, next Monday, members of this House will have a choice. Vote for common sense and cancel carbon tax on all forms of home heating. After 8 years, this government still doesn't understand that it needs to give all Canadians a break. Unfortunately, the Bloc doesn't get it either. They want to radically increase the carbon tax. Voting for the Bloc is expensive. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to reason, ignore his Bloc friends, and vote for our motion?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est important.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, I have to say this one more time, that there's no federal carbon tax in Quebec. The members for Quebec are fighting climate change. We are helping families and finding solutions that work for everyone. We are making solutions more affordable for all Canadians.
Madam Speaker.
On the Liberal tax on home heating, inexplicably, the member from Edmonton Centre suggested his constituents should switch out their natural gas furnaces for expensive, higher-emitting heating oil systems. And the member from Calgary Skyview has done precious little to get Calgarians the same tax relief for home heating that his party has given to other parts of the country. In debate here, the member from Thunder Bay Rainy River defended the Liberal tax on home heating, even as people in his community are struggling to afford food and housing under 8 years of the NDP-Liberal coalition. These Liberals need to get their act together. On Monday, these Liberals have the opportunity to admit the Liberal carbon tax isn't worth the cost and vote in favour of our common sense, conservative motion to axe the tax on all forms of home heating. Winter is coming and Canadians in all parts of the country are watching. These Liberals should do the right thing, stand up for their constituents, and vote in favour of this motion.